we're barely scratching the surface of the potential of what yoga can be. Once you are a true yogi, you've finished everything that you need to learn as a human being. That's the perfection of humanity. You've reached the ultimate goal at that point, which is liberation. We'll talk a little more about that, possibly to explain that. I did want to just read something that Taimni says here about Hatha Yoga and Raja Yoga. And he says it is necessary for the student of yogic philosophy to understand clearly the place and purpose of asanas in Raja Yoga. Asanas are mentioned only in a couple of the sutras here. And in fact, Hatha Yoga was only developed in about the 1300s. You'll often read that Hatha means sun, moon, but that's not exactly true. There is a word ha, which in a certain sense means sun, and ta, which can also be translated as moon, but the actual word hatha means forced, or something that is done with an effort. Many of these asanas, by affecting the endocrine glands and the pranic currents, prana being the same as qi in the Chinese philosophy, tend to bring about very marked changes in the physical body, and if practiced correctly and for a sufficiently long time, promote health in a remarkable manner. Hatha Yoga is based on the principle that changes in consciousness can be brought about by setting in motion currents of certain kinds of subtler forces, prana and kundalini, in the physical body. So he's saying that it has a very definite benefit. But now he's going to make a distinction as to what Raja Yoga is. In Raja Yoga, the method adopted for bringing about changes in consciousness is based essentially on control of the mind by the will and the gradual suppression of, and he uses a Sanskrit term, chitta vrittis, which is the mind, activity of the mind. The technique of Raja Yoga is directed towards the elimination of all sources of disturbance to the mind, external or internal. So let me read that. The technique of Raja Yoga is directed towards the elimination of all sources of disturbance to the mind, whether external or internal. Let me, do you want to pass those out? Two terms that are used quite often not just in this book, not just in the commentary, but also in the sutras themselves. Two terms which I would like you to remember. And they're Sanskrit terms, but one of them is called viveka, V-I-V-E-K-A, viveka. The second one is vairagya, V-A-I-R-A-G-Y-A. Viveka and vairagya. What are they? Well, one of the first limbs of Ashtanga Yoga is purification, or basically self-discipline more than anything. You have to start at ground zero if you're going to actually become a yogi, and if you're going to be able to meditate and create what it is that you can potentially create through the mind, through meditation. It's interesting because we'll find out later that the true goal of meditation is to go beyond the mind. But you have to use the mind to get beyond it. It's a little bit of a conundrum, but that's exactly what happens. So viveka means, what's the word? Discernment is probably the best word to describe viveka. Discernment, or being able to see clearly, really. Most people go through life and they have filters. They have expectations, they have likes and dislikes, they have well, their ego, for more than anything, is the biggest filter, because everything has to be filtered through our ego. It has to approve before we're able to perceive something. And unfortunately, it often is very good at flipping things around to suit our own purposes. So what happens is we're not really honest with ourselves. We see things the way we want to see them, or we discard them completely and say, no, that doesn't pertain to me. That was one of the biggest ahas in Eckhart Tolle's work. This is the first person that I've seen come down the pathway and say, hey guys, you need to take a good look at this idea of this ego that you're so attached to. It's really not very helpful if you want to become enlightened. And I haven't seen...
That seems to be emphasized in Western cultures.
I am glad that the Light on Yoga book does emphasize all 8 limbs, and it's not just the physical component.
Yeah, for sure.
There's a lot more to it than just...
It's exciting to, like, how much you could learn.
The Bible, or the source of all yoga philosophy, is not necessarily this book, but this is a commentary on a book called the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Have you ever read that book? Or?
No, I went to a discussion that one of my yoga instructors was having, and we just discussed like one of the sutras for like 2 hours.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
well, that's
just, like,
very easy to do.
Yeah, it was. So it was pretty cool. But there's just like so much interpretation involved. We just went way off track. But
so, just for a little background, the Yoga Sutras were written, no one knows how long ago. Some say a few hundred years ago, some say a few thousand years ago. But they're quite old. That's all we know, is they're very old. Every other form of yoga comes from the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And the type of yoga that he's talking about is called Raja Yoga. Now, he does talk about Ashtanga. This book, by the way, is written by I.K. Taimni, a Hindu Indian man who wrote this in the 1960s. He was not just a student of Sanskrit, because the original aphorisms are written in Sanskrit, but he was a practitioner of Raja Yoga. And although I didn't know him personally, I can tell that he knows what he's talking about. You know, when you read something and some people just kind of repeat stuff that they've accumulated over the years, and then every once in a while you encounter somebody that you know that they put it into practice. It's different now.
It's like the hairs stand up on the back of your neck and you know there's something real about this.
Exactly. So when he talks about certain experiences, you know that he's talking from personal experience and not just repeating information from someone. So the science of yoga is his commentary on the Yoga Sutras. These Yoga Sutras, if they were printed out in a book like this, would cover only about 10 pages. They're very short, very concise. I don't know the exact number of the sutras, but it's probably 150 at the maximum. And each one is one paragraph, sometimes only one sentence. So that constitutes only maybe 10 pages of this book. All the rest of it is commentary about the various sutras.
So the fact that you can discuss one for 2 hours doesn't surprise us.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah,
they're so profound.
Yeah.
But while we're talking about Ashtanga Yoga, the 8 limbs, and Brian mentioned some of them, the first 2 are what?
Nama and Niyama.
Which means?
Well, one of them has to do with living life more ethically.
Right.
And Niyama has to do more with self-restraint.
Okay. And some of the other Some of the others are the asanas, or the postures. Pranayama, which is breathing exercises. Abstraction. Now we get into more of the meditation part of it. Abstraction first, then concentration, then contemplation, and then samadhi. Samadhi. So these are the 8 limbs of self-discipline, which we call yoga. It's important to point out that it is self-discipline. We're talking about self-transformation, which, and Paul's going to cover a little more of this, but it means changing yourself drastically, radically. So just to repeat, the 8 limbs of yoga are self-restraint, fixed observances, asanas, breathing exercises, abstraction, concentration, contemplation, and samadhi.
What's abstraction?
Well, I don't know.
You know,
I will tell you.
To me, that's more pratyahara, which is detaching yourself from the senses.
Okay, I think that's very good. A very good description of it. So, first of all, you have to kind of extract yourself from the everyday world, all of this drama, all of this agitation that goes on in most people's lives. You have to first retire from that. But then what do you do? Now that you've kind of stepped back, now what do you do? First you concentrate. Now, even though these sound like they're very simple, they're not. As Taimyi points out, this takes, to reach any stage of samadhi, not a few weeks, not a few years, but a few lifetimes. Sounds kind of daunting. So, when people tell you, oh, I can teach you how to meditate in, just 5 minutes, they might be able to give you some hints and some suggestions, but you're not going to really achieve the deepest results until this has been practiced for several lifetimes. And part of the reason for that is this whole life-changing thing. You've got to change absolutely everything in your life, everything. And Paul will go over some of that. So this is the basis of Raja Yoga. And two of the, well, first of all, let me just mention something about the difference between Hatha Yoga and Raja Yoga. And hopefully, after this class, you will always make the distinction when you say yoga as to what type of yoga you're talking about.
So there are several schools of yoga. Seven.
Well, there's even more. But who can name some of the schools of yoga?
You mean like Iyengar and Christian? No.
That's a type of yoga.
Oh, okay.
Hatha yoga.
Hatha yoga, we all know. What about Bhakti
Bhakti
yoga?
yoga?
Have you ever heard of Bhakti yoga? Or Laya yoga, Kundalini yoga?
Kundalini.
Yeah, there you've heard.
There's
Done that.
karma yoga.
Karma yoga.
Raja.
And Raja yoga. And it's probably not a bad idea just to touch very quickly, mention some of the
Well, so
karma yoga.
in the Western world, when we say yoga, we think of it's hatha yoga. H-A-T-H-A, pronounced hatha yoga. And that's physical yoga, that's postures, asanas. When we go to a yoga studio, we do hatha yoga. Raja yoga, which is what our book is all about, is the royal yoga. Raja means royal or king, the king of yogas. That's mastering our being, mastering our mind control, pure meditation, reaching samadhi. That's Raja yoga. That's the goal of all other yogas. Bhakti yoga, B-A-K-H-T-I, B-H-A-K-T-I, is the devotional yoga, which has to do with religions and when worship. Karma yoga, everyone practices karma yoga when we do good deeds physically in the world. That's action, right action. Laya and Kundalini are synonymous?
Well, Kundalini is a form of Laya Yoga. Laya Yoga means the chakras, has to do with the chakras. The major ones are 7, and understanding the energy flow and how to begin to manipulate that. And then Kundalini is specifically raising the life force which resides at the very base of the spine and which normally awakens over a period of time, many, many lifetimes. But there is a way to awaken it prematurely, which is not recommended unless you have done all of the spiritual practices ahead of time to prevent problems. So that is a form of yoga which can be problematical. There have been people who have had severe mental disturbance because of practicing Kundalini Yoga, to the point that they couldn't even feed themselves. It's definitely not recommended to try it unless you know exactly what you're doing. So
I think we could mention though that most of the Kundalini classes aren't necessarily geared towards raising this serpentine-like energy from the root chakra. I think you two have taken more Kundalini classes than I have. What is the main style of Hatha Kundalini?
I thought it was more mantras, lots of mantras and kind of openings, and you not only do you say the mantra, but you also have movements with it. I think it's just like an opening, but not necessarily like you're saying an awakening.
I think it would be good to get the perspective of, say, a Hatha yoga instructor that actually teaches a Kundalini yoga class. Because I do feel like through the mantras and what I like to call the more awkward asanas that you can do in those types of classes, they do try to awaken that spirit, in the root chakra.
Oh.
It kind of seems like as if that's the goal.
Oh.
So, I'm not really clear on, how consistent it is with what you're talking about, Terry. But the music and the experience is beautiful.
Someone who actually knows how to practice Kundalini Yoga and who has awakened that has certain powers. They're usually clairvoyant powers, the ability to read people's past and to see people's auras, for example. There are many, they're called siddhis, they're powers, they're yogic powers. They are developed by true yogis. What we do, in Hatha.
Okay. Thank you all for coming. This is a presentation on meditation practices for the New Age. So we're going to start off with a meditation. All right. We're going to sound the Tibetan singing bowl just a couple of times at first, and then we'll have just 60 seconds or a minute, and then I'm going to read something at the end. So just take a few breaths. We'll chant Om together in just a minute. More radiant than the sun, purer than the snow, subtler than the ether is the self, the spirit within my heart. I am that self am I. at the beginning of our discussions, I like to explain why we chant Om, because some people think it's weird and don't understand why we do that. Have you been familiar with the Om?
Oh yeah, plenty of oming.
Plenty of Om.
Especially at the retreat center in Hawaii.
Ah, okay. I don't know if I mentioned to you guys, but she was spending time at a rustic retreat in the jungle, mainly for yoga practitioners and spiritual seekers and
Yeah. Volunteering hours.
all the above. So it's calming the energy and setting up our vibrations for studying more subtle ideas than what we normally do during the day. So that's why we like to attune ourselves. All right. So we don't have to right now. It's okay if you want to. So our book, we are here because of this book that we wrote. I mentioned it a little bit to you at dinner. Terry and I spent about 2 years compiling the manuscript, and it took a while to create the formatting and the artwork and the whole package, everything that goes into writing a book. And it was a great adventure learning how to do it. So much learning along the way, and we had a lot of help from our friends there and from lots of other people who we named in the front. But this book came about from several things. We study something called theosophy, and I did mention that before. Theosophy, in a short little sentence, it's the comparative study of science, religion, and philosophy. Theosophy has been around it's ancient. It's the ancient wisdom, basically. Theosophy is the ancient wisdom. And there's also a society called the Theosophical Society. We also discovered Eckhart Tolle and his teachings. And we decided, and it made perfect sense, that the teachings of Eckhart Tolle and Theosophy put together is the ultimate teaching. And so we thought we need to put those ideas, the synthesis of both of those teachings into one book, along with our own insight and our own experience. We wouldn't have felt worthy of writing this if we hadn't put these things into practice ourselves, and we didn't live the ideas that we put into the book and practice them all the time. And so that's why we feel capable and confident to present these ideas to the world. So we always like to say that we're all students and we're all teachers. Well, we're students of those who are more experienced than we are, and we're teachers of those who are less experienced, and there's no limit to how high we can go in both directions. So no matter what level of experience anyone is at, there are always those that have gone before and those that we can bring up. And once we take the first step on the spiritual path, immediately a sense of responsibility is bestowed upon us to bring others with us. So once we know we're on a spiritual path, we have to share it. So that's why we did this. The first discussion group that we did together was very fun. It was actually on this book. And have you?
Oh, yeah.
We talked about it. Okay.
Life changer, yeah.
Life changing. Well, life changing. Exactly. So this is his masterpiece. His first book was awesome, and this was his masterpiece. So we put together a 10-month study course. We kind of followed the same format that Oprah and he did, and this was in 2009, and we had great response from that. A lot of students came and participated in those discussion groups. We learned so much, and that was also part of the impetus for writing our book. So, who are you?
You haven't said who you are yet.
Oh, my name is Paul, by the way.
And I'm Terry. I just came along with Paul.
Yeah, right.
I have been studying theosophy for 38 years. And I discovered it probably about the same age that Paul did, so obviously many years ago though. So I've been studying it for 38 years. I discovered it actually in France when I was living there, and was walking down the street one day and saw a sign that said Société Théosophique, and I had heard of it, and I thought, wow, here it is right in front of me. So I left a note under the door because it was closed, and the next day this little old lady came to my apartment, knocked on the door and said, hi, we got your note, and we would like to invite you to come to our meetings. So I started attending the meetings there, I started ordering books from London that I would read, and as soon as I finished those, I would order another batch. And so for a year, I was just immersed in it, learning it. And then when I came back, I actually, after being in Las Vegas for a short time, decided to go to the headquarters for the American organization of the Theosophical Society and work for them. They have a wonderful campus, 40 acres of beautiful trees and lawns and buildings, about 22 miles outside of Chicago. So I lived there for a year and a half and worked for them, and then came back to Las Vegas and have been here ever since. But I, a few years ago, started doing some teaching in Latin America. Different groups asked me to give talks about theosophical topics, and I had learned enough Spanish that I could do that. So I started doing that. Now I'm actually doing the same thing in English, and Paul's been accompanying me for a lot of these. We're leaving, in fact, in 4 days to go to New York to do a weekend workshop up in near the Catskill Mountains in New York. And that's at a wonderful retreat center. If you want to look at it on the internet, it's called Pumpkin Hollow. Hard to forget a word like that. But if you go to pumpkinhollow.org, you'll see pictures of this place we're going to be at, and it's incredible. Have you looked at it?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
It's in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, it is. It's in the woods and just in nature, so it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to be there for 3 days and then back to New York City for a while, and Paul has to come back to work though. So anyway, I've been teaching for a few years now, and we did this class together, or this book that we wrote together, and now that's pretty much what I do. We're going to talk about meditation today. How many of you know that, well, you probably already know, that yoga is meditation? When you think of yoga, what do you think of?
Pose.
Poses, right?
I mean, depends, like, yeah, the asanas are probably the main thing I think of, like the context that I'm familiar with.
Okay.
Yeah.
And secondarily, what?
Well, I'm just starting to read light on yoga, so I could really
Okay.
cheat and go into all the limbs of yoga.
Oh,
Which I'm just learning though from reading, you know?
Yeah. But one of the limbs has to do with breath control, pranayama.
yes, exactly.
So to me, that's a very strong complement to that.
Just as they are, without the filters of the mind, without prejudgment. We're going to use 3 terms that are easier to remember, which will cover both viveka and vairagya. And those terms are non-judgment, non-reaction, and non-attachment. We often hear of non-attachment, and it's probably the most difficult one to practice, non-attachment. So vairagya, by the way, is exactly that. It's non-attachment, and it's also non-judgment too. It's non-reaction. It's all 3 of those. So by combining viveka, seeing clearly, and vairagya, you have already made a tremendous change in you. And you're not even ready yet to practice meditation. You're just covering the very first steps of it. So
There seems to be a little bit of a conflict even within that we might want to clarify.
Okay.
Non-judgment, but then we're talking about being discerning too.
well, so how do you reconcile that?
Well, it's being discerning without judging.
Well, and discernment means seeing things as they are. As long as we have these filters, we're not going to see clearly no matter what. We just can't, because everything has to make it through that filter to even get to us. Once we get rid of those filters, including the ego, then we can see clearly. That's the only time that we do begin seeing everything as it is without being modified. And it's the mind that modifies it.
It's almost like every belief you have is a filter.
Yes. Every belief, every expectation, every like, every dislike. So vairagya means, the easiest way to describe it is equanimity. Nothing phases you. Somebody tells you something that most people would completely fall apart. You know, maybe it's the death of someone very close to you. And remember the example of Eckhart Tolle about the philosopher who someone came and told him that his son had died. No reaction, except he said, well, I knew he was not immortal. That was it. Nothing, that's the sort of thing. Someone comes and tells you you won $20 million in the lottery. Oh, okay. There's just this acceptance of everything just as it is, without any emotion involved. It doesn't throw you into a panic. It doesn't throw you into excitement. Just this. What was the other story?
The farmer?
Well, no, not that one, but Eckhart Tolle's story about, is that so? You know, somebody accuses somebody of doing something, most people get all flustered and get very angry. Oh, is that so? And no matter what happened, oh, is that so? And that's vairagya, just this equanimity that no matter what life throws at you, you respond with the same attitude. Is that so? So, viveka and vairagya, two very, very important qualities to develop. Not easy at all. You can work an entire lifetime and make a considerable amount of progress, but it's with effort. Everything we do in yoga is with effort. It never comes easy. And Hatha yoga is it's a wonderful preparation for this higher form of yoga, which is Raja yoga. Let me just read what Taimni says about viveka and vairagya. And this is right near the very end of the book, when he's actually discussing having achieved a certain degree of samadhi. On your chart there, you'll see the different levels of consciousness. And Atma is the highest level of consciousness that we can reach in human form. There are other levels beyond that that will be reached in the far, far distant future. But as far as humans, these are at least potential levels of consciousness within the human realm. And so the person who has achieved, the true yogi who has achieved a certain degree of samadhi, is at the level of buddhi and atma as far as consciousness. Those are beyond thought as far as what we think of as thoughts. It is a realm of thought, but it's a very completely different way of thinking. That person still has to practice viveka and vairagya. So here's what Taimni says regarding that. The weapons used in the last stage, meaning achievement of samadhi, are the same as those used in the first stage. The yogi enters the path of yoga through viveka and vairagya, and he also leaves this path through viveka and vairagya. They strengthen and reinforce each other and form a kind of virtuous circle. You've all heard of a vicious circle. Well, this is a virtuous circle. This is a virtuous circle which accelerates in an ever-increasing degree the progress of the yogi towards self-realization. So those two qualities, viveka and vairagya, are what help us consistently achieve higher and higher goals. So we achieve self-realization first of all through viveka and vairagya, and we have to continually practice it, continually, right up to the very end.
We're talking about non-reaction, non-judgment, non-attachment. So if that's the goal, what are we doing now? Well, we're reacting, we're judging, and we're attached to a lot of stuff. So let's see what this guy has to say about moving past that. And his main teaching, which is just so brilliant, is the understanding of what the ego is and how it operates. And it's kind of magic just by the very understanding of what the ego is and how it operates, it begins to diminish. And that is a prerequisite for true meditation. As Terry was saying, we don't just sit down to meditate and then just automatically reach samadhi in 2 seconds. There's tremendous preparation, really years and years of preparation and lifetimes of preparation, working on the natural human condition, which is the ego. The ego is necessary, just like being in the physical world is necessary. Why is it necessary? If there was no polarity, north and south, physical to spirit, if there was no polarity, there would be no purpose. And we, as studying theosophy, and we as spiritual seeking people, we understand that there is a plan and a purpose to life. Life didn't just happen by chance, a fortuitous concourse of atoms and lightning struck organic material at just the right way to create life. There's a plan and a purpose. So what is the plan and the purpose? Well, we're talking about that now. The ultimate goal is to transcend the physical, and everything in life, every human, every animal, even what we think of as inanimate objects, are all on a path. They're all on a path of enlightenment. It's said, he even talks about it here, flowers are the enlightenment of the plant kingdom. Precious gems and stones are the enlightenment of the mineral kingdom. And enlightened human beings, masters of wisdom, maybe even Eckhart Tolle is one of the enlightened leaders and the culmination of all the knowledge and growth in the human kingdom. And then there are kingdoms beyond human that we don't have everyday contact with, but we know they're there because it's never ending. So at our little place in the grand scheme of evolution of the universe, we're challenged with the ego. It's there for a reason, and it's there for us to work through and learn from and grow from. Some of us are beginning to understand how it works in order to move past it. Some of us are hopelessly enmeshed in the ego, and the ego controls everything. And we all know people like that in our lives who don't understand that the ego is controlling them, that they're not controlling it. And they react, they judge, and they're attached fiercely to everything in their life. So what does he say on eliminating the ego? It's beautiful what he says. And it's actually very simple. It's just like flipping a light switch on. It's just awareness and ego are incompatible.
So good.
Okay, duh. So this is a quote from him. So all that is required to be free from ego is to be aware of it. Awareness is the power that is concealed in the present moment. Awareness is the power that is concealed in the present moment. Presence. He even goes on to say the ultimate goal of human existence is to bring that power into this world, into the physical world, he means. He means into the world where we think everything exists, where we tend to be polarized and we operate in the physical world only, but we don't have to. That's the goal of meditation, is to orient ourselves to the subtler planes, to our soul consciousness versus physical brain consciousness. Becoming free from ego cannot be a goal for the future. It can only happen right now, in the present moment, not yesterday, not tomorrow. And only presence can undo the past and thus transform our consciousness. If we weren't stuck in the past and worried or unhappy about what's happened in the past, and we could live purely in the now and not have any worry or judgment or anxiety, imagine how free we would feel. So he talks about the ego being synonymous with the word self. Well, that's a little bit uncomfortable to hear for me and for a lot of people, because if we're trying to work on eliminating ourself, that sounds strange. Well, why would we want to lose ourself? Well, I can just go get drunk at the bar triggers for us to react. And that's the challenge. That's why this is not easy. Yoga, philosophy, and becoming enlightened is not easy. We can sit back and you know, kind of relax in the lazy river, like I call it, like the lazy river of life. Have you ever been in a lazy river? At water parks, they sometimes have like a lazy river. So you just sit in a little raft and
go with the flow.
You just go with the flow of life, and that's what most people do. And the universe is evolving automatically. It's nature. It's just it's the natural progression of everything. You will evolve, but just kind of slowly, and it hurts sometimes when you bump up against the wall. You get a scratch like that, and you get bumps, and your foot might go in someone's face, and they might punch you, and that stuff happens. But if you kind of open your damn eyes and look around and maybe swim to avoid the wall and understand, maybe help people avoid the wall too, we can direct our own evolution and evolve faster. And why wouldn't we want to do that? So that's what we're doing.
The point is, it requires
work.
an effort.
It
You
requires
can either
work.
just lay back and lay on an inner tube and float,
Exactly.
or you can get out and swim in the direction and choose your own course.
Do you really believe that enlightenment is not easy? Because ultimately it seems like what you become is what you believe. So if you believe that in order to become, to transform self, that it's going to be this struggle, you know, thy will be done.
No, brilliant.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question.
Enlightenment, well, so he says the elimination of the ego can happen instantaneously, but we forget.
Yeah.
We forget, and we are triggered, and we react, and then we're back in ego.
Yeah.
It's up to us to remember and to orient ourselves to our soul consciousness. If we could operate from the perspective of our soul all the time, that's it. That's the goal. It's just we forget.
And if you just train yourself to become literally aware of the concept that awareness and ego are incompatible, and that becomes your core belief, that's, you know, it almost seems like anything else, once you achieve that, it becomes more effortless.
And that's exactly the point.
Yeah.
You can either say something is easy or something is difficult. I prefer to say that either something is impossible at this particular point in time, or it's easy because I already learned how to do it. So whether it's easy or difficult is not the question, but have I learned it yet? If you've learned it, then it's easy. If you've learned how to ride a bicycle, it's not a matter of being easy or difficult. You know how to ride a bicycle. But if you don't know how, it's impossible. You're going to try and you're going to fall off. So that's the way it is with anything in life. The point is that it takes effort. And you've either achieved that or you haven't. And the other point is it requires constant awareness. Yes, enlightenment can occur immediately because you're aware, but then 2 seconds later, you become unconscious because you forget. So then you have to do it again. And as you repeat that numerous times, then it becomes a way of life. There's no effort whatsoever.
So if awareness and effort is discipline.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what yoga is all about, is discipline.
And that's the swimming he's talking about. That's the swimming.
Effort and awareness.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be difficult unless you choose to make it difficult. You can go to a yoga class and you say, oh my gosh, that was the hardest class I ever took. Or you can say, wow, that was really challenging, but look how much...
He never says it's hard, ever. He's like...
But look what I got out of it.
Yeah.
You know, it's all in your attitude.
That's true. That's true. One of the other clues and hints that he gives to eliminate the ego is, and it has everything to do with non-judgment. It's observing without naming, seeing without naming. When we see things, we name them and judge them and put them in a box. And oh, there's a lamp, there's a tree. Oh, that's Terry. I know him. There's nothing about him that I don't know. Yeah. Oh, she's a girl. There's a chair, and we know it. That's not a very investigative or interesting way to live. It's kind of like, oh, I already know everything. I'm just gonna go do my own thing. So seeing without naming is actually merging with that. It's creating non-duality with the object that you're observing. It can be a human. It can be an idea. It can be an object. And that doesn't take place in the physical world. That requires a heightened state of consciousness. And at the ultimate goal of this is to observe something at the Buddhic level, which is where intuition occurs. And that's where the true merging of energies exists. So instead of seeing a tree and saying that's an oak tree and then that's it, and then walking along in your way, it's actually merging with the tree and understanding it. It's also the idea of what the word namaste even means. The light in me sees the light in you. And what was the movie that Avatar? What do they say in that movie? I see you. So when they say I see you, they mean much more than it's kind of ironic that they use the words I see you, but they're talking about my soul merges with your soul. And Eckhart Tolle talks a lot about seeing without naming. And what we're going to attempt to do is see ourselves without naming ourselves. So just a really quick and easy meditation practice. This is called Meditation Practices for the New Age. So what we're going to do, just for 60 seconds, it's very easy. We're going to go into just a meditation and ask ourselves, with our eyes closed, if you choose, who am I? And don't answer it. And just let yourself be with that question. Who am I? And we'll see what our brain does. We'll sound the gong first. So take a couple of deep breaths. Or I can just go pop some hallucinogenic fun drugs and lose myself, but that's not what he's talking about. That's not what he's talking about at all. He's talking about the lower self. There are two selves that we can talk about, and we have our chart there. Actually, can I see the chart? Where? Oh, here's right there. So the human constitution, physical, prana, astral, and the lower manas. So those first 4 blocks is our lower self. That's the transitory personality that we operate within. So we have our physical body, obviously. We have our astral or emotional body, which is where our emotions take place. And we have our lower mind. Now the 3 higher boxes are what we can call the true man, the true human, the true human. The Atma Buddhi and higher mind, or higher manas. That is the part of our being that is abiding, that transcends the physical and lasts after the physical body dies. The physical body only lasts, a very finite number of years. It's getting longer and longer with medicine, but our spiritual self and our soul, which resides at the level of the higher mind, our soul, that is the infinite part of our body, of our beings. And if we can work towards orienting our consciousness towards the higher self, that's where true freedom and true peace and true love and everything pure exists. So instead of being totally stuck down here where we think we are, it's not the case at all. It's not the case at all.
Let me, Eckhart Tolle mentions the ego and the need to get rid of the ego. And what do the Yoga Sutras say about that? This is what Tiny says about it. How does an individual become subject to the great illusion and the sufferings of the lower life? I think I mistyped this.
Oh.
How does an individual overcome the great illusion and the consequent sufferings of the lower life? By the imposition of the I consciousness, which makes him identify with his vehicles. No, okay, I was right the first time. How does he become subject to the great illusion and the consequent sufferings of the lower life? By the imposition of the I consciousness, which makes him identify with his vehicles and with the environment in which his consciousness is immersed. So in other words, we all feel that we, ourselves, is this personality. And the only way in which he can regain his freedom from them is by removing this covering of the I consciousness. So the true self is covered up by this personality, what we call the personality, our emotions, our physical body, our thoughts, and it's just a covering. It's a vehicle that is being used temporarily. If we can transcend that and become aware of the inner self, the true human being that resides and that is using temporarily this vehicle, then we're in a position to gain enlightenment. Enlightenment simply means discarding more and more of the outer trappings and allowing our consciousness to become aware at a higher and higher level, just as on your chart. There is no such thing as final enlightenment. People talk about sometimes enlightenment as if it's instantaneous. You're either enlightened or unenlightened. Well, that's not how it works. Everyone is enlightened to a certain degree. You wouldn't have any consciousness otherwise. So even a rock has a certain degree of consciousness. So you could say a rock is enlightened at its own level. As human beings, there is a kind of an average level of enlightenment or awareness. It's not very high, as you can tell when you drive down the street and you see people driving asleep.
Basically, yeah.
But the more advanced people of humans have achieved already a higher degree of enlightenment, and it continues. That never ends, not even once you pass out of the human kingdom and into other kingdoms of nature. So at no point does that ever come to an end where you have achieved all the enlightenment that is possible. It's just an infinite gradation and expansion of consciousness.
Jesus even describes this as, or he suggests to deny thyself, and Eckhart Tolle mentions that. And when I was growing up in a Christian family, I never understood what that meant. I thought it was like a self-deprecating, like my fault kind of thing. Deny myself, I'm no good. But that, if you contemplate on that phrase, deny thyself, that's exactly what he's talking about. It's the lower self. He's prompting us to reorient ourselves to our soul consciousness. And the Buddha has a similar saying, or he talks about anatta, which is a Sanskrit word which means no self. It means orient yourself. That's funny, our semantics, orient yourself. Orient your consciousness to that which is connected to everything, which is at the highest level. Eckhart Tolle says, once we are able to stop identifying with our physical bodies, what remains is the light of consciousness in which thoughts, experiences, and feelings come and go. That is true being, our connection to and merger with God. So a question that he prompts us to ask, that Eckhart Tolle prompts us to ask is, can I sense my essential beingness? That I am in the background of my life at all times. We tend to forget that we're spiritual beings. We tend to get caught up in the daily activities, and that's very true. We all have jobs that we do, we all have conversations with people, we get frustrated while driving with our significant other when we get in a little tiff. We forget that we're a pure spirit just having an interaction in the physical world. But if we can remember to constantly remind ourselves, can I sense my pure consciousness in the background through which this temporary physical experience is happening? It creates the separation. And it's also magic to experience this, because everything loses a little bit of its importance in this physical world. Everything we get so worried about and so worked up about softens and stops mattering as much. And that's where peace comes, and that's where we can experience that detachment, and some people call it dispassion, but it's just the equanimity, the way of approaching life without worrying about what might happen, or what did happen or what didn't happen. What really matters then is the ultimate goal, which is our spiritual progress. He says, when you notice the ego, this is the awareness we're talking about, when you notice the ego, an immediate separation occurs. You're no longer identified with it, and it doesn't have control. You sense the consciousness in the background that gives rise to the ego, and it becomes clear the ego is a separate entity from you, and that's the beginning of the elimination of the ego. He also goes on to say that we can transmute the energy. We don't talk about the pain body too much, but the pain body is part of the ego. It's the accumulation of negative emotional energy, the accumulation that we don't let go of, that we retain for some reason. It's just natural, that we worry about, that we agonize over, and it does grow, and we can share it with people, and we can feed off of other people's pain bodies. And a beautiful thing about this transformation of our consciousness through this process of elimination of ego is that we can use the energy that's stored in this pain body as fuel for consciousness. And I think that's the coolest thing ever. Using something that's perceived to be negative or detrimental, transforming it into fuel for consciousness. And
by being aware of it?
By understanding that there is an ego separate from yourself, and watching it arise when it does through triggers, which we haven't talked about yet. You can start to transmute the energy and transform the perceived negative energy into fuel for being aware. We talked about before the power of sadness. Do you remember that discussion? Mm-hmm. How sadness can create a tremendous opening in your life? Because it causes you to kind of become tremendously introspective and really analyze your life, and it's almost like taking that flashlight we talk about, and it's kind of painful, but it can create a huge opening, and you can come out so much stronger and use that as fuel for something different and new to be brought into this world. Just like he said up here or earlier in the book, the power of the present moment. The awareness is the power that is concealed in the present moment, and the ultimate goal of human existence is to bring that into this world. Sadness can do that, and we're also learning that sexual energy can do that too from our book that we're reading by Elizabeth H. You didn't happen to bring that book, did you?
I didn't.
Okay.
No.
There's a really awesome book that we're checking out now called Yoga and...
It's called Sexual Energy and Yoga.
So many people have just unhealthy relationships with sexual energy. That's just natural for our society, mainly in Western cultures. But just like the pain body can be fuel for consciousness, ways to channel sexual energy can be fuel for consciousness as well. And it's very, very cool to play with that, because sex is so taboo in our society. We don't talk about it. Just like death is taboo, but these kinds of things that we tend to shut away can be fuel for consciousness. All right, let's see. What's next? Oh, we mentioned triggers. So part of the elimination of ego is, okay, being aware of it and then understanding what causes me to react through ego and what causes me to not react through ego. So you can basically choose how to live your life, through ego or through pure consciousness. And once you understand what triggers the ego route, we learn to eliminate those triggers and to recognize them when they pop up. So everyone has buttons, right? Do you have any buttons? Do you have any buttons?
Yeah.
How often do your buttons get pushed?
It depends if I'm home with my family, like I was.
Family always pushes buttons.
Yeah, why is it?
Why is that?
It's the most difficult challenge for me. I don't know.
Well, it's karma. It's karma. We're born into certain families for that exact reason, so they can push our buttons.
One of my favorite quotes from Eckhart Tolle is, "If you think you're enlightened, spend a week with your family."
Postures, and I would see it through my own eyes, not like watching myself. And that's a form of meditation. But anything to quiet the mind of all of its automatic mayhem. Yeah. I'm just talking. Is that okay?
Go ahead.
Okay, doing great. Where are we? Let's see. What do we need to cover now? Let's see. Oh, let's talk about creating a sacred space. Meditation should be a regular practice. If we're going to be dedicated and if we're going to try to improve any aspect of ourselves, it needs to be a regular practice, a frequent regular practice. And the duration of meditating doesn't matter as much as the frequency of doing the practice. So my personal preference is early in the morning before I start my day. Terry's preference is in the middle of the night. Crazy. Wakes up at anywhere between 1 and 3:30 and meditates. So that's his preference. I think he's prone to do that because everything is as subtle as it can be at that hour. And it's easiest to reach the subtler planes. It's easier to move out of the physical world into the spirit world when everything around him is quiet. Some people like to do it in the evenings before they fall asleep because they're winding down. But my personal preference is in the early morning before the day gets started. And I just try to do at least 5 minutes, and that's hard for me even. But it's every day that matters most. But I encourage everyone to pick a time where they can be consistent and set a space for that. Have a sacred space. We talk about that in our book, about a place in our home, preferably in the home. It could be in school or office, but preferably at home where it's sort of protected. Not a lot of people are causing commotion, not a lot of loud sounds, no television in the area. Some place where it can be your space. When you meditate and you increase your vibrations, there becomes a flow of energy. The universe is abundant with energy, and we're numb to it normally unless we attune ourselves to that subtle energy. When we go into a meditative state and we get better at it, this energy begins to flow from the universe through us. We become channels. Your sacred space becomes charged and energized. Terry's bowl, I know that thing is charged and energized because there's just something magical about his bowl. This is mine, and I'm working on it, but the more time I spend with it and the more we meditate with it, and it just becomes attuned with our vibrations, and that's what happens to our sacred space. You have an awesome sacred space at your house. Tell us about it.
It's just one room just for meditation. I have some beautiful things on the wall that are just beauty, and my cats love that room. I have my little bowl, and I also meditate in the middle of the night because my cats wake up at 4 a.m. almost on the dot, so that's just a good time to let them out and go in the room. It's purely dedicated to meditating and reading and studying. So like I had my mom visit, and her and a friend had come in the room, and then they started gossiping, and I'm like, you got to get out of the room. So it really is about that, just calm, peaceful, and beauty in that room, and I feel very comfortable in it, and you guys have all helped me energize the room.
People talk a lot about vibrations to the point that it becomes almost a kind of a catchphrase, but it is very true that every thought we think, every emotion we feel creates an energy field. So instead of saying a vibration, let's just call it a particular form of energy. And that's there. It is actually existent, and it affects people. More than anything, it affects the ones who are close by to where it was created, but it can also be transmitted. If you send a thought of compassion and healing to someone who is 5,000 miles away, that thought, that energy will travel to that person immediately. It's not restricted by the speed of light or any other physical phenomenon. It travels instantaneously from you to that person, no matter how far away. So that sets up then a frequency or an energy field in the immediate vicinity of that individual. So as we become more sensitive to these energy fields, we are able to perceive them more accurately ourselves. So if you were a perceptive individual, having practiced Viveka, you would walk into Stephanie's meditation room and you would immediately feel the quality of energy. If you go into a bus station or a train station or an airport, you feel this frantic energy, people who are nervous and tense and sometimes angry and sometimes sad because of whatever circumstances caused them to travel. And you would be affected by all of that energy. So as we practice yoga and as we practice meditation, we are able to perceive these more accurately. And that's, again, one of the real advantages of what we see from the work we are doing.
Preparing for meditation is important. We talked about a little bit about how long it takes to prepare for true meditation, but some hints and clues that we know to be true from our own experience. If we watch TV before going to bed, it's very difficult to meditate in the morning or at night. If we watch violent movies, it affects us. Loud concerts, I mean, it's this is a challenge for me too, because I play guitar and I love music, but I know very, very well that when I go to a concert, I still do sometimes, no one's perfect. When I come home afterwards, I just feel like there's been a blender like in my insides, like someone like blended me up, and like I'm mush, and seriously, or in my head even. There's nothing calm about me after a concert with loud music. Same thing with alcohol. It's almost impossible to truly meditate if we've been drinking, and if our vibrations are just, you know, very coarse and very. If you look at a wavelength, an image of a wavelength, if our vibrations are like this, it's very hard to change that into a subtle energy, which is where our soul exists. Let's see. A goal for calming our general life energy is to live our outer life as a reflection of our soul quality. So the soul, having it exist on a higher plane of existence, nothing coarse or evil or negative exists in the soul. And if we're trying to orient ourselves to the soul, then we should make an effort to live our lives like that. This is a good segue into the idea of the modern sannyasin. So sannyasin is the spiritual seeker who renounces physical possessions. Everyone's heard of that story of somebody who sells all their worldly materialistic pursuits and goes into the desert for 40 days or into a cave and meditates. Well, we believe that is not the way to do it anymore, at least, because the world needs people in it operating who have a certain degree of enlightenment. So the idea of what we think is more beneficial is to be in the world but not of the world, to do our best to not be rooted in the world, to do our best to be rooted in the spiritual world but still operate in the world. Why? Well, we need to be teachers for those who can benefit from our help, and we need to be students of those who can teach us. Watching TV all the time on MTV and participating in like dramatic shows like everything that's on MTV these days, all the reality TV shows, gossip and drama at work, participating in all these things is being of the world. That's what we want to try to avoid and withdraw from, and understand that our work is done on a higher plane, even though we still do need to be in the physical world. What else can you add to that?
I was just thinking about the television. I don't watch TV, so and every once in a while I'm in a waiting room or somewhere where a TV is on, and every time that happens I think, wow, now I know why I don't watch TV. I was getting a haircut the other day, and of course the technician had a TV right there, and you can't avoid it. And I'm watching this show that is, people with this revolving thing that knocks them into the water if they don't jump over it or go under it at just the right time. And I thought, this sounds like a babysitting tool for adults. It's just to keep them occupied, so that I don't know what, I really don't know what the purpose of most of these programs is. But Paul is talking about this stabilization. And this is probably a good point to bring up the idea of elimination of emotional energy in our lives. That constitutes a huge part of our personality, is our emotions. And the symbol for emotional energy and for the astral plane, because that's the plane of awareness where emotions exist, the symbol is water. And it is one of the best symbols that you could ever come up with. Because imagine this pool of water that's so calm that it looks like a mirror. And it actually functions like a mirror. If you have a pool or a pond of water that's absolutely clear and absolutely unruffled, it will reflect whatever is in the sky, clouds, the moon, the sun, birds flying over, everything. And perfectly. It's a perfect reflector. And in fact, you can look down into it and see through it just as it.
Okay, let's open our eyes. So when most people ask themselves, who am I, we normally name our roles. I'm a human, I'm a male, I'm this, that, and this and that. But what is behind all that? That's the goal of what we're trying to understand. Right? So what are we? What are we?
Nothing.
Ah, that's kind of, that doesn't sound very good. I want to be something.
Oh.
I want to be famous.
Oh.
Who are you, Stephanie?
I am.
Ah. Okay.
I was even, when I was asking myself who am I, it was more like, who am I to even ask who am I?
Oh, so you had a conversation.
I don't know.
So, who are you, Jessica?
Well, what came to mind was exactly what you said. I'm not defined by my roles or anything that's coming to the image of who I am right now. And then so it was kind of like, oh, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
It's true.
Yeah, that's it.
What does matter then?
I just think like that very connection like with like our higher selves and like functioning from that place more automatically is like, no.
That's the goal.
It's like
exactly.
being in flow, like not fighting too hard. It's just
It can be easy. Life doesn't have to be fighting.
yeah.
And who's Brian?
You know, it was similar to Jessica's. It was just not caring and just trying to be comfortable with you are what you are, whatever you are, and not trying to define it, and just being okay without labeling who you are.
Brian, when you sit down to meditate, what actually happens? What do you actually do when you sit quietly and go into a meditative state?
I try to proactively calm the mind and then focus on the breath.
Proactively calm the mind?
Yeah.
So you're using energy and action to still the mind. Does it work?
No, not necessarily. It can really depend, but I think it always comes down to having that non-judgmental or non-reactive perspective. So even if the mind is active, you know, it's still okay. And you know, ultimately, I feel like after a meditation, you're always going to feel better. So it's just a matter of degree of how much.
I think that most people have different ideas of what meditation actually is. And some people think that it's work in order to make the mind stop and be still. But what we can challenge ourselves with and everyone else with is that it's no work at all. We just have to release the idea of the thought of trying to still our brain, just let the thoughts come and go. And I love it when the yoga teachers in class, when we're sitting there or laying there in savasana, just trying to stay alive, when they, like in between a posture, for example, the floor series, when we're just about to expire, let the thoughts act like wispy clouds on a windy day. And it seems like everything they say in the hot room is so much more profound than it is like right now. But I try that and it really does work. It really does work if you just know that your consciousness is not the thought at all. It's a really cool separation. Your consciousness is the I am. That's you. That's me. That's our true self. It's our consciousness. We are pure spirit and pure consciousness that is operating through the physical brain temporarily. Our consciousness is not rooted in the brain, but when we realize we can watch the brain, then we can see our thoughts as the wispy clouds. And sometimes they're like cumulonimbus clouds with lightning inside, and they're huge and billowing and ominous, and sometimes they're stratus clouds, sometimes they're little wispy ones, and they go. So it's really, really cool to let them go, and it's a different experience. But meditation is not, the goal of meditation is no thought, is still brain, and that is an abnormal state for human beings.
Terry and Paul, what do you think about the notion of having a centering thought as part of your meditation? You know, for instance, I am perfect, I'm healthy, I am strong. That's actually one that I had earlier today. So, I mean, do you consider that to be meditation? Because there is a focusing or a concentration on a particular concept that you want to facilitate.
100%. There are different levels of meditation, of course. The highest form of meditation, which we've mentioned several times, is samadhi, which we're not at all in the physical body at all. Our consciousness has transcended that, and so the idea of having a focusing thought can't happen because we're not in the brain at all. But of course, that is one of the levels of, that's incredible focus and perhaps even contemplation. So yes, that is part of the meditative process, most definitely. Our brain has to be able to focus on one thing in order to be able to meditate. It has to be able to calm itself and focus on something, and only through that can we reach higher levels. You were going to say something and I barged in.
No. The whole point is that we're getting rid of the ego, or at least the attachment to the ego. Paul and I had a series of talks in New York and Connecticut and New Jersey about Raja Yoga. And people really struggled with this idea of getting rid of the I consciousness or the personality. In fact, Taimni says about that, those who come to yoga out of curiosity drop out sooner or later, unable to bear its ceaseless strain and the ruthless stripping away of the personality which is involved. They really struggled with that. Do I really have to get rid of the personality? Well, you actually can't get rid of the personality, but what you can get rid of is your attachment to it. You're always going to have some personality that other people will perceive as you, whatever that may be. But if you are completely oblivious to it and have no attachment to it, that's what we're really after.
I can also say that it seems to me that the general goal of meditation, of course we're talking about specifics and things here, but the general goal is to control the mind. And if we can live our lives with a relative sense of control over our mind, that is meditation. It's not the highest level of meditation, but it can be worked on in lots of different areas. So everyone's heard of being in the zone in sports, like when you're rock climbing, or when you're doing hatha yoga or race car driving. Being in the zone, Tiger Woods when he's ready to putt, that's a meditation. Why? Because his mind is laser focused, laser focused. That's a form of meditation. It's the opposite of when your mind is going wild and some people say, I can't sleep, my mind's going crazy, the monkey mind. That's not meditation at all. But being focused, being in the zone, living your life with focus is a form of meditation. Waking up in the morning and remembering before you even open your eyes, which is what I strive every single morning to do, before I open, my consciousness is awake, and before I open my eyes, I set intentions for the day. I actually try to remember my dreams. I try to feel my body before I even fully enter the physical world. That's a form of meditation. Focusing on breath throughout the day, watching your breath, remembering to take deep breaths and filling the lungs. I think these are all forms of meditation. And what you asked about a centering thought, most definitely. I think it's important for most of us who haven't been able to reach samadhi. Of course, we've got to have a centering thought or even an object. And we're going to do something with these rocks to help us with that centering thought. Some people like having candles. Some people like having incense. Some people like having white noise, which we mentioned in our book. Sometimes it's nature sounds. This bowl. This is exactly the purpose of this, is to help us focus. So yes, all these different things are types of meditation. Anything that we can use to help us get focused. But the thing to remember is we don't want to become dependent. We want to just train ourselves to understand what it's like to become focused. And the ultimate goal would be to be able to enter a meditative state without any assistance, eventually. Sometimes it's the idea of love. You can meditate on that. A lot of times what I do is I focus on sending the abundance of energy that I have out to my loved ones and to people in my neighborhood. I know I'm blessed with a lot of energy. I can talk loud and fast and have a lot of physical energy and excitement. And sometimes I'm sitting in my morning meditation with the bowl and I have extra energy. Let me just imagine that going out to whatever human being is in like a half-mile radius of me. I don't know, my neighbors, who knows, So anything. It could be an idea, a process, improving your physical health condition. When we were training for the yoga event, I did a yoga event on stage. It was great. It was pretty interesting. It was a process of training, going up on stage. I would do a meditation of visualization of myself walking up on stage and
We're
doing.
not there. You can see fish swimming, you can see the rocks at the bottom or plants at the bottom, whatever happens to be there, if it's perfectly calm and clear. This is the symbol of the emotions. But what happens when you have turbulence? All the mud gets stirred up. Then nothing is reflected accurately. Now everything is scattered, broken up. The sunlight and the moonlight even, instead of reflecting a body, a heavenly body, you have all these little teeny bits of light. It doesn't even look like a unit anymore. Now it looks like it's scattered everywhere. And you can't see anything accurately. You would have to have an incredible computer program that would recombine all of those different fragments, like a hologram, and make it into what could have been reflected on an even surface. But I don't know that that's even possible. You can't see down into it either because this mud's all stirred up, so everything is in a mess. And that's how our emotions are. They create this, it takes the beauty of life and it makes it into this muddy mess. It doesn't matter whether they're good emotions or bad emotions. There's no such thing as good or bad. It's just emotional energy. It throws everything off balance. Once we establish equanimity, or this vairagya, all of that smooths out again, perfectly calm. And it's really the only way you could ever possibly get into a deep meditative state. But that doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen in a few moments. In our book we say it takes at least 5 days to prepare for meditation. Well, it really takes 5 years or 5 decades, because you've really got to work on getting that equanimity down. And we do what we can. We can make progress even though we're not perfect. Obviously, if that weren't the case, no one would ever learn how to do it. You do what you can with what you've got to work with, but always work on that awareness. If you're perfectly aware, there's no emotion. You cannot be, just as he said, Eckhart Tolle said, that you can't have ego and
Awareness.
Awareness at the same time. You also can't have emotions and awareness at the same time.
That's true.
It's not possible. You have to be in the present, you have to be in the moment and seeing absolutely clearly without any judgment, any reaction. If you have emotions, that's a reaction. So once you eliminate that, and it takes effort, and you have to constantly remind yourself, at least I do. I don't know anyone who's achieved that instantaneously, but it's instantaneous for the present time. You're either in the zone or you're not. You're not halfway there. You're either in the zone or you're not. It's that simple.
I know we've been sitting for a while. Does anyone need to use the restroom or anything? Okay. Do you want to do that for a minute? I know it's been a while. I might have to use it too.
I'll be right back.
Oh,
We'll come to it. Okay. Do you mind?
No.
Can you just pause for a second?
and then we can do a, yes,
The stone meditation.
yes.
Unless you want to do a dance or something.
Get our emotions all going, right?
I have to, pardon me for one moment. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. That's easy.
Great.
Okay, another meditation practice. Stephanie and Brian have done this before with us. Pick up a stone. Okay. Whichever one
Talks
speaks
to you.
Talks to you.
Speaks to
Because stones talk sometimes. Okay. So this is a two-part exercise. What we're going to do is use the stone as the focusing thought for just another meditation and watch our mind to see how still it can be with using the stone as the point of focus. It's just an object. We're just using this as an object, and we can have our eyes open or closed, But the goal is to see if we can focus on the stone and keep our mind there just for 60 seconds. So, one quick note before we get started. We always want to have as comfortable of a position as possible while we're trying to meditate, because we don't want to be aware of our body. We want to transcend our bodies. So as comfortable as possible with an erect spine. And also, I didn't mention the idea about food before also, but eating heavy meals, spicy meals, lots of spices in the latter part of the day, if you meditate in the evening, causes unrest inside the body, makes it difficult to meditate. Terry doesn't have any sugar after a certain time of day either, right? Doesn't that,
well,
like white sugar?
I generally don't eat much of anything after about 2 o'clock, except maybe some fruit or celery or something very, very light.
I can also add that a lot of people choose not to eat meat for the specific reason that the meat carries the vibrations of the animals who were slaughtered, and depending on your level of sensitivity, that can affect your meditation. That certain vegetarians don't eat meat because of that reason. Of course, there are 100 different reasons why vegetarians are vegetarians, but that's one of the reasons. The vibrations of the animal are still in the meat. Okay, so okay. So I failed. I found myself worrying about the time, worrying about the temperature in the room, and I did my best to trace my thoughts back to the stone, but for someone who practices it every single day, it's still very difficult. So was anyone able to focus on the stone the entire time?
I was.
It's awesome. Yeah. No, Stephanie?
No, I wasn't.
You notice that your thoughts just come in. So I wonder what it would be like to get like Ryan, to be able to focus the whole time.
One of the things that I did was I guess I focused more on concentration as opposed to meditation. So it was literally just, I mean, not thinking about the stone, but just observing it.
So you had your eyes open.
Yes.
I think that might have been my mistake. If I were to be focusing on it, it would give me a physical connection with it, other than just...
I had my eyes closed, but I was trying to focus on the energy, and my thoughts didn't go anywhere else, but it would sort of disappear, and then I would have to focus again on feeling it, sort of like you know how Pablo was showing us that you rest your hand on something, and after a while you don't feel it anymore,
right.
And you have to move it or create some sort of a sensation again to reestablish that sense of contact. And it was kind of the same thing here. If I wasn't thinking in a particular way, it was like it disappeared, and then I would have to not move it, but just refocus again and feel the weight of it and the coolness of it again.
Well, that's exactly the point of our next exercise, which is the moving meditation. So in our book we call it ultra slow motion, and this is it's a way to help us learn how to meditate, because it continually has motion, and just like Terry said, when you move it, you can regain the focus. So an exercise that we like to do, so it's called ultra slow motion, and it's the act of taking the stone in one hand and moving it from the other hand to your forehead, the ajna center, and back, but taking 3 minutes to do it, 5 minutes to do it, 7 minutes to do it, as slow as you can, all the while making sure it is moving the whole time. So it can be that slow. And that's a meditation, because your mind is almost forced to be focused for that entire 2 to 3 minutes. And it's a strange sensation, because even if you're sitting quietly and 2 to 3 minutes, I don't think I can ever do that without having my mind waver at all. But when you do ultra slow motion like this, it's really cool to see what happens. Your mind is so focused that entire time. So we're going to do the exercise. So from the hand to the forehead and then back.
And eyes open or closed?
I leave mine open. I don't know. What do you think?
Either way.
Either way. So Let's go for it. You can take 5 minutes to do it. It's an interesting sensation. Quick, slow.
I'm slow.
Oh, that was good. That was good. Yeah. Okay. So for me, I know that my brain can focus if it's moving, and it created tremendous focus, much more so than when it was just meditation before. Bless you.
Oh, thank you.
Bless you. What were you thinking about the whole time?
The stone. Moving the stone.
Good.
What else can you
Focus.
think about?
True. That's the point.
I was kind of moving it with every exhalation.
Oh.
So I was focusing on my breath, and then when I would exhale, I'd move it a little bit, exhale, so that I could kind of stay with the stone and stay with my breath.
I tried it with my eyes closed for the first time. Usually I leave them open until it gets too close, and then but I tried it completely with my eyes closed. A little bit different sensation.
The whole idea of this exercise is just to have us do something that we don't normally do in life and do it slowly and consciously. Eckhart Tolle says that we can even walk upstairs consciously. It's being fully present in the moment. It forces us to be present, and if we can bring some of that presence into everything we do, our life is going to be so much better. The end. It is actually 3 o'clock, so I didn't realize that it was that close to 3.
Well, we have a few. We did start a few minutes.
That's true. Is there anything that you want to bring up at the end?
Well, let's see. Any questions or any comments that anyone has based on what we've covered today?
What do you think is the sign of a good meditation? If that's even an appropriate question.
The sign of a good meditation is that you do it.
Yeah,
because you're judging it as good or bad. So
Exactly.
I mean, I'm just like...
I don't think there is a good or a bad meditation. I think making the effort is what's most important. As long as, and consistency, like Paul says. If you just kind of do it haphazardly, hit or miss, maybe I'll sit down and meditate. Your results will reflect that. If you consistently, every day, with few exceptions, put aside some time and make an effort, your results will come. You will definitely have results. So I think that's any consistent meditation. Any meditation is good, and consistency makes it even better.
I don't think I talked about this book at all. I have gotten a lot of cool information from this book called The Science of Meditation by H. Saradarian. And he has, his very first chapter gives 15 or 20 purposes of meditation. The first one came from this book, which is the best one. I'm a little biased. So, the purpose of meditation, simply put, is the development of a reliable contact with our higher self, the soul. That's the ultimate purpose of meditation. In addition to that, it calms the emotions, but also calming the emotions is a prerequisite. So the conundrum, it has to happen at the same time. We have to work on calming our emotions, but it also is a calmer of emotions. Thought control is also a prerequisite, and it happens at the same time. It's not an activity, it's a state of being. So meditation quiets the personality, so our focus can be redirected from our transitory personality to our abiding individuality. Meditation produces a server of humanity. Once we're in control of the mind, we can use that control to help all. Meditation purifies our space, as Stephanie knows. Thought forms and emotional energy that lingers. It creates a communication between higher and lower self. True intuition comes from the higher self, and when our lower self is in communication with our higher self, more intuition can be brought into the physical world. Even telepathy, clairvoyance, clairaudience, they experience forms of telepathy that can be experienced when we are operating at that higher level. Meditation also strengthens the physical body by energizing, aligning, harmonizing the physical atoms which are making up our cells and our organs and all the systems of the body. So meditation actually strengthens the body. We know that through Hatha Yoga also. Meditation generates energy. It removes blockages that prevent us from receiving and passing through the natural energy of the living universe. Like I was saying earlier, we have the ability to become a channel, and when we have emotional disturbances, it blocks that transfer of energy completely. When we become servants to humanity, we receive the necessary help from above. Meditation also attracts others to us for guidance, love, energy, help, because we have a sense of clarity that is obvious to other people when we are clear enough to meditate. People have trust and faith in us. It happens naturally. And it opens our mind to see all viewpoints and perspectives of our situations. These come from his book, The Science of Meditation.
I have one more.
Who's that by?
H. Saradarian, you can check it out.
Another benefit of meditation, which comes from controlling the mind, is comprehension in reading. I've found that things that I read several years ago, I reread them now and I'm like, that's not even the same book. I'm getting so much more out of it. I understand it so much better and retain it so much better. And it's almost as if I can tune into the viewpoint of the person who wrote it. Like I'm almost getting information beyond what's written. Almost like I'm tuning into the thoughts and the mind of the person who wrote it. So there's some very definite benefits to meditation. And these are just a few of them.
I always think that about you, that because you meditate so much, you can absorb so much. Why you can learn the Spanish and learn and articulate everything that you know. I always think that about you.
And he has such incredible retention.
Yes.
He can read
exactly.
scriptures
exactly.
off the top of his head.
Well,
Do you think it increases your sensitivity to toxic substances like television,
yes.
noise, bad food?
Yes, absolutely. The more you withdraw from that sort of energy field, the more it affects you. Yes, absolutely. So for me to go into a concert which Paul would still be able to enjoy, I would not enjoy it at all. It would be just like so many fingernails on a chalkboard.
Or even just going through a casino.
Yes, exactly. And in fact, I was going to mention that. Last time we had lunch with your family at a casino,
Yeah.
I couldn't wait to get out of there. I mean, we were just in a restaurant within the casino and only walked in and out, but I couldn't wait to get out of there. And it was it's just the vibrations there.
We love movies, and we rent so many more movies because I can't go. It's so loud, and then some of the previews, I close my eyes because they're violent or scary, and I mean, and I normally do watch violent movies. I don't have a problem with that, but now I'm just like, oh, it's too loud. I can't go. It's too much.
You're a modern day sannyasin. You're withdrawing slightly from certain things that you used to do.
Things,
Yeah.
Sure.
This is actually a problem for a lot of people, is that they realize that as you make progress, you're creating more and more of a divide between yourself and other people, including family members and friends. You may find that they one by one kind of just drop off your radar because you don't have that much in common with them anymore. You have to be okay with that. You can't go ahead of the pack without making some sacrifices, and that's one of the major ones, is realizing you're going to lose some relationships. You don't really lose the true relationship, which is with soul to soul. That's the true relationship. But the personality to personality relationships sometimes will fade away. Have you noticed that?
Of course. Of course.
Well, that being said, you still have that need, I think, just being social beings or being humans, to have that type of connection with other humans, so that, you know, if others you're shifting from because of that awareness and transcendence, so to speak, I'd like to think that there are new connections to be formed.
Well,
Very true.
with the ones who are willing to stay, like family, usually can't get rid of you, they will notice the change, and they may actually enjoy it. You know, I have family members who come to me for advice, which they never used to before, and they recognize that I've changed, and they see it as something positive. But not all people will recognize it as being positive.
I think we're good.
Yeah, I think so. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope it was enlightening and
That's great.
enjoyable.
That's great. That's awesome.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we will have 2 classes in June, so we'll let everybody know when those are.